All right. So today, I titled the sermon, it's a little bit provocative, but it works as a good title, I guess. It's Burning Each Other with the Fire of Hell. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is some of the most dangerous things we face as Christians today, and some things that are very common and pervasive in any churches, but and these, what I'm talking about these are the sins of the tongue. These are words that we speak, lies, slander, backbiting, and gossiping. Thankfully, I don't know of any particular rumors or gossip that's currently circulating in the church today. I'm a little bit loud. If you could turn me down just a little bit. Oh, I'm good for Reggie, though. All right, so somewhere in between then. So I don't know about any particular gossip that's circulating in the church right now. So if you think I'm talking about something that somebody said, that is not the case. I don't like doing sermons like that. I just want my sermons to be as generally applicable as possible. And I know this is a very important thing for the church, especially in our current very vulnerable state where we don't have a pastor and we're in a state of flux. So I just think this message will help us to remain united and prevent us from hurting each other any more than we would, accidentally. All right, so if we're talking about the tongue, let's talk about the power of the tongue. So first, let's look at the physical power of the tongue. And here, when I say tongue, I mean the words, specifically the languages we speak. So if we go to Genesis 11, this is the first mention of the word tongue in the Bible. And this is the story of the Tower of Babel. So let's turn to Genesis 11, verse 6. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So we see here when they were united in language, they were united as a people. When they had one tongue, they were united. Let's go to Nehemiah 13. Nehemiah 13:23. In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ashdod and Ammon and of Moab, and their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, Ye shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons for yourselves. So we see here that in this particular case, the sin was not that they spoke a different language. The sin was that they were intermarrying with other nations. But certainly this language barrier would undoubtedly divide them from the rest of Israel. And what we're seeing here is that language can unite us if we're all of the same language, of the same tongue, and it can also divide us if we are speaking different tongues. This is all physical, but I think there's a parallel here that we should not ignore. The first time we read about tongues in the Bible is when God uses it to physically divide everyone. And today, the tongue is used to divide people in a spiritual way. 1 Corinthians 1:10 says, Now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that ye all speak the same thing, and that there be no divisions among you, but that ye be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. Proverbs 16:28, let's turn there. It's a similar verse. We're going to be in Proverbs a lot, so you might as well put a bookmark in here. A froward man soweth strife, and a whisperer separateth chief friends. So the physical power of the tongue to divide is mirrored in a spiritual power of it to divide also. So speaking of the spiritual power of the tongue, I know if I were to give my thoughts and opinions on how damaging our words can be, I probably wouldn't rank it very high in the damaging ranking, I guess you would say. I probably say, yeah, it can damage relationships, it can hurt feelings, it can offend us, insult us, anger us. But my opinion doesn't matter. So if we ask God about the damage that our words can do, he would say things like he says in James 3:6. So keep your bookmark in Proverbs. We're going to be there a lot. But turn to James. James 3:6 says, "And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire, of hell. For every kind of beast, of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison." So God clearly has a much higher opinion of the power of the tongue than I do. He says things like it's a fire, and the fire is the fire of hell. It's an unruly evil. It's full of deadly poison. No man can tame it. If we go back to Proverbs chapter 6, Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 through 19 says, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate. These 6 things doth the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. A proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren." So in this list of just 7 things that God hates, 3 of them deal directly with the tongue, with our words one to another: false witnesses, lies, and sowing discord. But thankfully, the tongue isn't all bad. There's also power in the tongue to do good. Proverbs 25. Well, we're in Proverbs 9. Let's just go to Proverbs 16 real quick. Proverbs 16:24 says, "Pleasant words are as an honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones." Then over to Proverbs 25. Verse 11 says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pitchers of silver." And then verse 15 says, "By long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone." So there's good things that we can say. There are evil things that we can say. And even in verse 15 where it says, "A soft tongue breaketh the bone," that's talking about being persuasive with it, with soft words. So that's a very useful tool, a very powerful tool that when misused can be extremely damaging. So since we can use our words to do both good and evil, we need to be very careful that we use them for good. James 3:10 says, "Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be." So right after it calls it a evil, a fire, a world of iniquity, he says that out of the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. And when it says these things ought not so to be, it means we should not be cursing people. It should mean we should be blessing them. So tonight we're going to look at some of the ways that we should and should not speak. We're going to talk about the good use of our tongue very briefly, because I think that's a little less valuable in some ways. But there are many things that we are told that we should speak of, and I'm just going to briefly give you a short list of these. We are supposed to say the truth, Ephesians 4:25. We are supposed to edify one another, in 2 Corinthians 12:19. We're supposed to pray for one another and pray to God, many references for that. We're supposed to praise and sing to God. We're supposed to teach and preach the gospel in Matthew 28. We're supposed to comfort one another. And we're also supposed to reprove one another in Proverbs. Since we're right in Proverbs 25, let's go to Proverbs 25, verse 12. As an earring of gold and as an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. So clearly he's speaking reproof to this person. So that's the good part. The bad part is there's many evil uses of the tongue. And tonight I'm just going to look at 4 specific ways that we can sin. And it's not going to be a long message, but I think there's some really good things in here. So the first thing we're going to look at is lying. And a summary definition of it is to knowingly make an untrue statement with the intent to deceive someone. So lying is expressly forbidden in multiple places throughout the Scripture. Proverbs 25:28, since we're right there. He that hath no rule over his own spirit. No, I think that's the wrong verse, but that's all right. I've got other verses. Exodus 20, verse 16. This is the 10 Commandments, some of the first things ever spoken by God to man. Certainly the first codified law. Proverbs 20, verse 16 says, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." So in the 10 Commandments, God thought it was so important that he should right away, among one of the first things he ever tells anyone is, don't lie. Do not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And even in Proverbs 6:16, in that list of 7 things God hates, lying is right there as one of them, and bearing false witness is also one of them. I think there's a subtle difference between the two, but we're not going to cover that today. In 1 Samuel 31:36, we see an example of lying. I think lying is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think it needs any, at least not right now, it doesn't need a deep look into proving exactly what it is. But for a quick example of lying, 1 Samuel 31, verse 3, it's talking about Saul's final battle against the Philistines, where he dies. So his death is recorded here in verse 3 to 6. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, Draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come down and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword, and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men that same day together. So that's the account of his death, and let's jump to the lie, which is in the next book, 2 Samuel 1, verses 5 through 10. This is an account of an Amalekite who tells David of how Saul dies. After he tells David what happened, David here cross-examines him. He says, And David said unto the young man that told him, How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man that told him said, As I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him and saw me, and called unto me, I answered, Here am I. And he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me again, Stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, for anguish is come upon me, because of my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them hither unto my Lord. Let's jump down to verse 14 now. And David said unto him, How wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the young men and said, Go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, Thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. So comparing these two accounts, clearly the Amalekite was not telling the truth. What happened to Saul didn't sound a thing like what the Amalekite claimed. I've heard people say that the Amalekite was trying to find favor with David, since pretty much everyone knew that Saul and David didn't like each other, and Saul was constantly trying to kill David. Maybe he thought this would buy favor with the new king. I think that's probably true. I think another part of it is that he did have the crown and he did have the bracelets. Where did he get those? I think he was robbing the dead. I think he was grave robbing the battlefield, and he found the body of Saul, brought these things to David, made up a story, and the story was a lie. He was bearing false witness against himself. And what I want to point out here is that if there ever was such a thing as a white lie, this would definitely be one. All of the victims involved were dead. This man was telling lies about Saul and maybe even the armor bearer, but they weren't there. They had already died. Nothing he said afterward would make any difference. There was no harm to anybody. His lie was not going to do any damage to anyone. There was no physical or otherwise harm. And yet the Amalekite died because of this lie. And I think this was a very just killing. I think David did the right thing when he had him killed for this. It's important for us to know that lies are not forbidden because of their effects on us. Otherwise, white lies would be permitted. Lies are evil not because there's not a scale to how bad a lie is based on its effects. Lies are simply wrong because God says they were wrong, and God said they were wrong because God himself doesn't lie. And all of our morality eventually comes back to the nature of God. We know God doesn't lie because of Numbers 23:19. He says, I am not a man that I should lie. So lying, right there, simple, clear-cut instance of lying, and the man thought he was going to do well because of it, and he did not. So don't lie. The second sin we do is slander, and slander is similar to lying, but there's a little bit of a distinction. Slander is false statements about one person to another person with the intent to damage the first person's reputation. So let's go to some examples. Romans 3:8 is a good example. So in Romans 3, we're dealing with grace as it pertains to sin, and you're really going to have to read the full chapter for a good context to this. But the context is not really the important part. The important part is found in verse 8. Let's read verse 7. For if the truth of God hath more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner? The lie is not, he didn't actually lie. It's a hypothetical lie to talk about some deeper questions in verse 8. But anyway, the idea is that since grace is good, why isn't it good that we also sin? So verse 8 says, And not rather as we be slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, Let us do evil that good may come, whose damnation is just. So what they're saying is, some people were accusing the disciples of teaching that we should sin so that good may come. And this good would be repentance and redemption and the grace of God. And that is not what that's clearly not what the disciples ever taught. But this was a common slander reported about them in the first century. I mean, they were still there. They were hearing slander about themselves at that day. So that's an example of slander. People were telling other people that the disciples, people were lying about the disciples to other people in order to damage their character. We see in 1 Timothy 3:11, we're talking about bishops, and verse 11 says, "Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things." So clearly, we're not to slander, and not even, and even, so here's an interesting example where the person who is being qualified through these qualifications, it's not even up to him to do the right thing, it's up to his wife. So it's, and which is again a sin of the tongue. It's actually, I didn't think about it just now, but it's one of the only things that the wife must do that could disqualify her husband, is one of the sins of the tongue. So again, it just underlines how strict God, what level of gravity God holds these sins to. All right, so slander is a subcategory of lying. If it is enough to say do not lie, but since there are specific verses talking about slander, it's important for us to know what it is. So one of the defenses to slander is, well, if it's the truth, is it still wrong to say? It can be. So the next category of sins that we can do is called backbiting. And the definition of this is to say mean or spiteful things about a person, such as someone who is not present. So notice that the change here is that it's not necessarily dealing with a lie anymore. These things may be true. It's not necessary that they're true, but it might be so. But the defining characteristic here is that these things are intended to harm someone when they are not there to defend themselves. So let's go to Romans 1:28. So we're seeing the intent in all these things. The lying, it's with the intent to deceive. Slander, it's with the intent to destroy their reputation. Backbiting, it's the intent is to harm someone, maybe personally, or even with their reputation also. But the key difference is that they are not here to defend themselves. And it might even be the truth. So Romans 1:28 says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. Without without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So here we see backbiting listed in a very long list of very grave sins. And it's speaking about these people who are reprobates. They know the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death. They not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So this is a grave sin that we should not be committing. That's for sure. Let's give you an example of backbiting in the Bible. Let's go to 3 John. There's only one chapter. And about half of this book is dedicated to this one example here, even though it's a very short book. Let's look at verses 9 and 10. I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, received us not. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. So this man Diotrephes was prating against them with malicious words, and they were not there. This person was, he wanted to have the preeminence, he was self-important, he was proud, he wanted to put down John and any of the disciples that often went with him, he would put them down with malicious words. It doesn't necessarily mean that these words are not untrue. Maybe he's taking something out of context. Maybe he's highlighting something that was harder to understand. Maybe he was twisting some words. It might have been completely true, but without John there to defend himself, this was backbiting. And we see again, intention is right there in the forefront, maliciousness. So there we go. So we have lying, slandering, backbiting, and the last one is gossip, which is found. Gossip, the word is not found in the Bible, but talebearing is, and talebearing means one that spreads gossip or rumors. So it's an easy substitution. So a definition of gossip would be a person who habitually reveals personal or sensational facts about others, or a rumor or report of an intimate nature. So now we've moved completely away from lies. Gossip is about revealing secrets or personal information that may be true. But if it is true, why can't we say it? If the commandments say don't lie, don't slander, but it's all true, it's not a lie. It can't be slander if it's true. So why can't we say it? This is where gossip becomes a little more tricky. It relies heavily on intentions. It relies heavily on audience, and it relies on the purpose. So gossip is mostly wrong because it's not, what's being spread is not intended for us. It's a secret. It's none of our business, and it causes strife and division. So Leviticus 19:16, let's turn there. Thou shalt not go up and down. I'll let you get there. Leviticus 19:16. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord. Proverbs 11:13 says, a talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Let's go to Proverbs 26. Proverbs 26:20-22. Where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. As coals are to burning coals, and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly. So especially those first two references there in Leviticus 19 and Proverbs 11, we see that thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer. And the idea of a talebearer is often associated with someone who is going around, someone who is spreading things. It's not a direct, take this information to this person. It's wandering around, spreading rumors, spreading lies. Let's see. So let's find an example of gossip. Actually, you know what? Let's. I have some. This is a somewhat interesting part of the Bible, and I find this very helpful in a lot of ways. Sometimes there are contrary examples. So sometimes there are cases in the Bible where it seems like it's contradicting itself in some way. And these are, we shouldn't be afraid of these areas. These are actually some of the more important parts of the Bible, because when you resolve the contradiction, you learn more from that. So I'm going to find some examples of things that seem to be gossip but aren't. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 11. All right, 1 Corinthians 11:17. Now in this day that yes, that's right. Now in this that I declare unto you, I praise you not, that ye come together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when ye come together in the church, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it. So Paul is hearing that there are divisions among you. It's interesting that he says he only partly believes it, because this is somewhat of a rumor. Chapter 5 of the same book also says in verse 1, it is reported commonly that there is fornication among you, and such fornication as is not so much named among the Gentiles, that one should have his father's wife. So there's clearly, these would be secrets. At some point, these things were secrets, and they have got out. And Paul is hearing about them. Someone is coming to Paul, telling him what is happening in the church. I would argue that this is not gossip. And my justification would be this, that the person who received the report, Paul, was directly relevant to the discussion. He had founded this church in Corinthians. He had visited them before. He was someone who was well known to the church. This person was coming to him to report on the state of the church, asking for help. This fornication and the disunity, the contentiousness in the church, it was not a secret anymore either, because he's saying it was commonly reported. And the intentions of this person who was telling Paul about this were to seek help and not to destroy the reputation of the people in that church. They weren't spreading lies just to talk about the lies. They weren't spreading rumors, or in this case, it would be the truth. They weren't spreading these things to harm other people. They were spreading it to get help from someone who was directly related to the church, who was directly related to the situation, and who was coming back to visit them to help them out. So I would say that part would not be gossip. Now, if that same person had simply spoken this to a random person in Corinth and just blabbed about everything that was going on in the church, that would be gossip, but it would be the same words. It's interesting that the circumstances and the intentions are key to this distinction. I've got another interesting example. Let's go to Esther, the book of Esther, verse 2. Chapter 2, verses 21 to 23. So this is talking about, obviously, Mordecai. In those days when Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when the inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So I would say this is also not gossip. When Mordecai overheard a plot to lay hands on the king, this was obviously a secret. Of anything in the Bible, this would be the most secret of all secret things. They're trying to either assassinate or assault the king. You don't tell people this. So he overheard this. This was something that those two, they didn't want him to know about. Yet Mordecai told Esther, who told the king in Esther's name. And it's interesting that the way that they tell this is also important. Esther didn't say that, oh, I heard this from someone. She certified it in Mordecai's name. She said, I heard this from this person who heard this from this. There's a whole traceable line there. She's not trying to hide anything. She's not trying to simply damage reputations. She wants the king to know something that directly pertains to him. So this was not gossip because the audience was relevant to the discussion, and the intentions were to harm him, were to warn him of the imminent danger. And another critical part of this and the previous example, in this case, the king made inquisition into the matter before he carried out the judgment. And Paul in 1 Corinthians said he partly believed it. They didn't accept what was said 100% at face value. They didn't believe it outright. They heard it and they verified it. And that is something that we can definitely take lessons from. We should definitely do the same when we hear what we think might be gossip. And it's always best to err on the side of caution. All right, so let's look at an example that is gossip. Let's go to Genesis 27. So Genesis 27, verse 1, this is talking about Isaac when he is about to bless Esau. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, now I am old. I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field, and take me some venison, and make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spoke unto Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison, and to bring it. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison, and make me savory meat, that I may eat and bless thee before the Lord before my death. So now she starts scheming after that. But that was the relevant portion where she overhears a private conversation that Isaac was having with her son. So this is the story of Jacob taking the birthright from Esau. The result of this all is the theft of the blessing, not the birthright. Sorry, that comes later. So an interesting part of the story is that it begins with Rebekah overhearing Isaac talking privately to Esau about his blessing. She tells Jacob about it with the intent to steal the blessing for Jacob. So we see here there were secrets. Nothing wrong with secrets, but Rebekah heard the secrets and then spread them. That's the key. The audience was not intended for Rebekah or Jacob, but she spread it anyway. The intentions were bad. She was going to have Jacob steal the blessing. But it's important to know there are no lies involved with this. So often when we hear gossip or justify the spreading of gossip to ourselves, at least I do, I think, well, it was all true, so it couldn't be wrong. Now, could it? But yes, it is. It can be wrong if someone doesn't have the need to know, if someone doesn't have the immediate necessity to hear what's being said. And especially if it's a secret. If it's not a secret, it doesn't matter. So everything she told Jacob was true, but it wasn't for him to hear it. So those are just some outlines of gossip. One last point I have before we conclude is there are some ways that we can prevent damage. So I hear a lot of people say that, oh, once you say something, there's no going back, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. There's lots of illustrations of you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, and that's partly true, but it's also not true. So let's look at what we can do when we experience gossip, or how we can prevent gossip. So the first thing that I would say is you have to recognize that offenses will come. James 3:2 says that no man can tame the tongue. So it's going to happen. You're going to be gossiped about. You're going to be gossiped to. You're going to be gossiping yourself. So just recognize that nobody's perfect. Let's be a little long-suffering with each other. So the first thing you can do is, as a listener, is be long-suffering and forgiving. When Jesus tells his disciples to forgive, he says 70 times, 7 times. So just basically don't stop. If you're the speaker, let's look at some tips. If you're the one who may or may not be spreading gossip, here's some tips for you. James 1:19 says we are to be slow to speak. So when in doubt, don't say anything. Proverbs 16:20, we read that, says where there is no wood, the fire goeth out. Gossip builds upon itself. So if you see something spreading, that's a hint. If you see something spreading and no one is openly declaring it, that's a hint that it's gossip, and you should not engage with it. Another interesting one is from 1 Timothy 5:13. It's talking about being idle, and specifically the widows in this chapter. So it's discussing whether or not the church should be supporting certain widows. So it says in verse 11, "But the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry." That's all right. So verse 13, that's just kind of the context. Verse 13 is, "And withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not." So right there, that's probably the clearest verse in the Bible about gossip. They're idle, they're wandering, they go house to house, they're tattlers, busybodies, they're prying into other people's business, trying to find things to spread to others. So don't be idle is probably a good hint. Let's go to Colossians 3. Colossians 3:8. So as someone who might be speaking gossip, this is an important verse. It's pretty general, but it applies here. "But now ye also put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds." So right there, don't lie. Put off filthy communication. If you are involved with other people who are known to have bad communication, put them off. Put them away. Don't even, maybe don't be friends with them. Don't speak with them. Verses 12 through 17 also speak on these things. Let's just read verse 17. "And whatsoever ye do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him." So it's broadly speaking. I know Joe Day preached some messages on this. It was put off the old man. That's a super broad, general, universally applicable way to stop sinning. And in this case, lying and filthy communications are some of the things we are to put off. And then lastly, you don't have to turn there, but 1 Peter 3:10 says, "For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile." So just generally, get in the habit of not speaking bad things. Don't speak evil, and don't speak any guile. Don't try to skirt around the edges of gossip either. It's just bad practice. So if you're the listener, if you're someone who's hearing gossip or lies, slanders, backbiting, be long-suffering and forgiving. Cover that. Don't engage with it. Proverbs 20 and 19. And then there's always Matthew 18, which is probably the strongest. Let's turn there. It's probably the strongest defense against most bad practices in the church. This is typically called church discipline, but we're going to look at verse 15, which is, we haven't even got to the church part yet. The church doesn't show up until verse 17. So verse 15 says, "Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother." So in the case of gossip, if you hear gossip about you, or if you hear something about someone, go directly to that person. This completely removes the spreading secrets option. If you don't go to anyone else but the person being spoken of, you can't be spreading secrets since it's their secret. So this is a one-on-one thing, and let's see. And here we see the goal, the intention of this speech or communication would be to gain thy brother. So pure intentions, You're going to the person involved. This is all good. This is not just for verbal sins. This is not just for slander or gossip. This is for all sins. But here it seems to work very well. Verse 16 deals that if you will not hear thee, then there are more things we do. Then you take one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. So this is not gossip itself either, because you've already gone to the source. You've already tried to work out your differences with that person before you go spreading it to lots of other people in the church. So this is not gossip itself. This is the remedy to gossip. If you hear something and you're not sure that you should be listening to it, or you're not sure that you should be talking about it, how about you just go to the people involved and ask them directly? And especially with gossip, a lot of times we find out they don't even know about any of this. They don't know what's going on until they're the next to last person in the whole church to hear about these things, and it's about them directly. So if we go to them directly, none of this happens. Rumors don't start, rumors don't spread, secrets don't get out, and the church remains unified. So let's look at Proverbs 18:13. This is pretty much the last thing. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto them. So here we're talking about this plus Matthew 18 gives us a good groundwork for due process, I would say. It's a way to verify something. You hear a whole matter. You hear both sides of the matter. You bring it up with them. It's not spreading, it's hearing. You're hearing it from the source in both ways. And you do not answer it before you've heard it. You don't take the one side you've heard, because obviously any story that's one-sided sounds very convincing, but you have to hear the other side also. That's why backbiting is such a danger, because the other side is not there to defend themselves. And it's why backbiting and slander are so effective, because the person is not there to defend themselves. You have no choice but to accept what they're saying. You have nothing to counter their arguments with. And we're not to do that. If you hear something about someone, you should confront the person talking to you and have them go to the person they're talking about and work out the differences. That's Matthew 18. That should be a regular thing that we see. All right, so just to conclude, so we've seen that the tongue is a very powerful tool. God holds it in very high regard, both physically and spiritually. It has been used to divide nations, the whole world, and even close families. We have seen that there are restrictions on what we are allowed to say and what we are supposed to say. We saw that unlike most sins, there are some things about the tongue that are not universally wrong to say, but the context and circumstances can make it wrong. Finally, we saw that there are ways to help prevent and repair the damage done by the improper use of our words. And let me just leave you with this, James 1:19, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath."